Global condemnation over Russia's invasion of Ukraine was unanimous yesterday, with many nations and the United Nations describing it as an unprovoked aggression against a sovereign state. In retaliation, the United States and its Western allies in Europe moved swiftly to impose sanctions on Russia's government and its businesses. Also, Nigeria's House of Representatives directed its leader, Hon Ado Doguwa, and the chairman, Committee on Foreign Affairs, Hon Yakubu Buba, to liaise with the Foreign Affairs Ministry, the National Intelligence Agency, and Nigeria's embassy in Kyiv to ensure that Nigerian students in the Eastern European country are evacuated immediately. Now, joining us to discuss what many have described as Europe's biggest land war since the Second World War, and what Nigeria and other African nations should be doing to help their citizens caught in the crossfire, is Professor Bolaji Akinyemi, a foremost foreign policy expert and Nigeria's former Minister of Foreign Affairs. Good morning, Professor Akinyemi, and thank you for joining us. Good to see you again, sir. Okay. Well, Prof, very quickly, how far do you think Vladimir Putin can go? And how effective do you think these sanctions will be?
Well, two questions as usual rolled into one. Putin can go as far as he wants to. He could cover the whole of, he could occupy the whole of Ukraine by the end of today. But he cannot sustain the war effort. It's one thing for an army with a blistering approach to cover, but when you are faced with partisans and guerrilla warfare, you cannot maintain it. How far will he go? Honestly, we have all been wrong in reading Putin's mind. So I have no idea, and nobody has any idea how far he will go. What Putin has done, nobody expected him to. When he first of all recognized the breakaway republics, everybody thought, okay, this is it. He's got what he wants, and he will hold on to that. Only within 48 hours for him to now launch a full-scale invasion of Ukraine, a violation of international law, a violation of the United Nations Charter, a violation of all the protocols in Europe, which he, as president of Russia, had been a party to. He simply turned up everything, including the understanding, the model, security model of post-World War II Europe. He's turned it up within the space of how many days? We don't know what motivates him. Does he want to be a modern-day Tsar? Does he want to be a modern-day Stalin? What does he want to be? What's his legacy? What is driving him? What is this about Ukraine that is a bee under his bonnet? We simply don't know. But one thing is now obvious. You see, we should pay attention to statements made by policymakers and not simply dismiss them as rhetoric. When his foreign minister, the day after Putin had recognized those two republics, said, actually, Ukraine has ceased to exist because it has lost the majority of its people, it has lost the majority of its landmass. What is Ukraine? Ukraine doesn't exist anymore. That was an indication that actually the ultimate objective of the Kremlin is the abolition of Ukraine, the destruction of Ukraine as an independent country. And surely that cannot be acceptable in the 21st century or in any post-World War II period for that time. You cannot destroy an independent country. If you are allowed to do so, you have destroyed the basis on which we have constructed the world order. Every incipient dictator will now have a sight on his neighbor that he wants to grab and incorporate into his own empire. So really, when the president of Ukraine says it is not Ukraine that's on trial, that it is the whole world, the world order as we know it, he was telling the truth. Not that he expects Ukraine to come and attack, not that he expects Putin to come and attack a country in Africa, but that there may be countries in Africa who have their sights on small neighbors that they want to grab in order to increase their own landmass. Or that in Asia, for that matter, there may be countries also who have their sights on their neighbors. That's what the president of Ukraine meant. This is not a flippant matter. War is not a laughing matter. War is a crying matter. But let me say this in a kind of a logical flippancy. When Kremlin says Ukraine has lost its right to exist because it has lost some of its territories, let us extend that logic to the United Nations and Russia itself. When the United Nations was established, 3 countries were members from that part of the world: the Soviet Union, Ukraine itself, and Belarus. Russia was not a signatory to the United Nations Charter. It was the Soviet Union that was the signatory. Do we now say by logic that since the Soviet Union had been abolished, that Russia is not a member of the United Nations, that Russia should be expelled from the United Nations because it's not a signatory to the Charter? Do we extend that logic that far? I think the Kremlin should be careful about what they wish for other countries because they may be applicable to themselves.
Well, thank you very much, sir. But with regards to deterrence, that clearly failed. There's been a lot of criticisms, especially of the UK, about the tepidity, the insipidity of the sanctions that have been imposed on Russia so far. My question is, why are the Western allies not going for the jugular and placing sanctions on Russia's energy exports? You know, in the Reagan era, when Saudi Arabia flooded the world with cheap oil, the USSR could no longer fund their war machine, and we all saw what happened next. It collapsed. Why isn't the same being applied here? Why are the Western allies not touching the oil and gas trade?
I don't know. I have said it on this program, on your program, because we've discussed Ukraine 1 or 2 times, and we've discussed generally the foreign policy of Biden. I said within 2 weeks of Biden getting into office that if other countries, especially countries that are hostile to the United States, perceive Biden as a weak leader in foreign policy, that he doesn't want to use force, that is averse to the use of force or the threat of the use of force, that's the greatest danger to world peace, because they will want to try him. And that's what has happened in the case of Ukraine and Russia. I have said it on your program that when he took the option of the military force off the table, before the negotiation had even started, that he emboldened Putin and that he weakened himself. Now, you've spent months threatening fire and brimstone and whatever else hell produces if Putin did what he has just done. And then after he did it, I thought within 2 hours, the president would be before the television announcing these sanctions that are supposed to cripple Russia. It took days. And then you say you are still, and then when he announced it, honestly, it was like a slap in the wrist. I mean, when I was growing up, if I did something wrong in school and I was reported to my mother, the slap I would get at the back of my neck, and that's before my dad comes back with his own, will be by far stronger than what they slapped on Putin the first time. And then that encouraged him to now go for the jugular. And as you rightly said, again, it took 3 days before they all started announcing this, announcing that. They have not imposed cutting him off from SWIFT, which will cripple the banking system. They said because some European countries are objecting to that. They haven't gone after his oil exports, again, because some European countries are. And yet, you know, this marks of the appeasement policy that we had that encouraged Hitler to finally try to gobble up the whole of Europe. The European countries will be the first victim of Putin, not even the United States. So what is all this pussyfooting that is going on? Take the United Kingdom. All that money, Russian money, of the oligarchs in British banks, have they been seized? No. We are thinking. I listened to Boris Johnson address to Parliament and the crossfiring of the questions. Each time they raised a critical issue, we are thinking of that is the answer. Each time they say, why are you not doing this? I promise my honorable friend, we are looking at it. You've been looking at this for months. So I have no answer to your question. While I can explain why they will not put military boots on the ground in Ukraine, a rational decision, I cannot, for the life of me, explain the infantile sanctions that it's like they're afraid of Putin.
Yes.
And when you are afraid of a dictator, you are encouraging him.
Prof, sir, 2 things I'd like to kindly, respectfully disagree with you on, sir. We know who Putin was. So all of us saying we don't know he was going to do this, I think we're just lying to ourselves. Sir, last year, Putin wrote a 5,000-word article that I read, and he made it clear. His goal in that article was, I want to be a modern-day Ivan the Terrible. I want to take the Soviet Union back. That was what he said. That article was written in July 2021. One, is it because Joe Biden is weak? That's why Putin could get away with this. Because he showed that weakness in Afghanistan. And now he's shown that level of weakness again. Secondly, sir, let's talk about the implications for Africa. Because France has seized their Operation Barkhane in the Sahel region. And why they seized that was because Mali brought in the Wagner Group, military contractors from Russia. The Wagner Group, close to Putin, has a foothold in Central African Republic, in Mali, and going to Guinea and some other parts of Africa. Is there not going to be a possibility of some day soon where Putin will put his foot on the African soil?
Rufai, I don't disagree with you. In fact, both of us agree on on one of the issues you have raised. Putin has been predictable. And when you look at his background, a former KGB officer, if you read the history of the unification of Germany, because he was the KGB officer based in East Berlin then, and when that crowd massed on the division line, the war separating East and West, he picked up the phone to Moscow to ask for authorization to release forces from the Russian base in eastern Germany. Nobody picked up that phone. And that was signal to him that the game was over. He said he wept as to what had happened to his homeland. So I agree with you. Very predictable. You could read him on the palm of your hand. So is the weakness of Biden the lack of leadership in America? There's a vacuum in the White House, and he's exploited that. Now, as regards your comment on Africa, well, let me take the short-sighted view, because frankly, I am fed up with what France has done in the Sahel. You've been in Mali for 9 years, and yet you've not been able to help the Malians defeat the jihadists. You now say you are living there and leaving it to the Malians. You know, France had its own devious objective in the Sahel. If there's anybody who can help us push France out of the Sahel, I will be in favor of that. It's like what Churchill said. If the devil agreed to help him fight Hitler, he will go into alliance with the devil first and deal with the consequences later. France had been a threat to Nigerian territorial integrity and sovereignty from the day we became independent. France set a trap for us in Bakassi. Maybe Bakassi is going to be our own Crimea, and Obasanjo walked into that trap. Only God knows what's going to happen in 50 years' time between Nigeria and Cameroon over the Bakassi Peninsula. But if the Russians will help us push France away from the Sahel, I will dine with them, but with a long spoon. So we don't disagree at all. We don't.
Okay, Prof, let's take a look at the Nigerian response. The Federal Ministry of Foreign Affairs issued a statement through its spokesperson yesterday that Nigeria has received with surprise the news of Russian invasion of Ukraine. Well, Nigeria must be the only country in the world that is surprised. Meanwhile, the embassy in Kyiv, the Nigerian embassy says, well, the Nigerians in Kyiv, they are on their own. They should just make their own private arrangements. But at the same time, the House of Reps is saying, well, they will send 2 of their honorable members today, all the way to Ukraine, to go and bring the Nigerian students back. I don't know whether they are going there with Keke Marua, or they will go with Yuba from Nigeria, or which airport, they will use to evacuate Nigerians. But Prof, what's your assessment? This is your territory.
Well, at times we make a laughing stock of ourselves. First of all, the airwaves over Ukraine are closed now. And even if they are not closed, Air Peace is not going to fly in dodging Russian helicopters and Russian fighter planes to land and bring Nigerians out. Yes, I agree that Ukraine is outside the limit of Nigerian capability. But then we shouldn't expose. You know, there are times it's better to shut one's mouth and let people think you are ignorant than to speak and then people be confirmed that you are really ignorant. Let the House, the House of Rep, face its issue with electoral bill, budget, whatever it is, and leave the foreign policy space alone. They flexed their, I won't say their muscle, they had no muscle. They flexed their voices, and let us at least try and get on with explaining what concerns us about this. It's a pity about the Nigerians in Ukraine. The one statement I agree with is that, sorry, you're on your own. Because even the British said to their citizens, get on the available plane, and that's last week, out, because we won't be able to come in to fetch you. The Americans said the same thing. And I think maybe last week, the Nigerians also should have said, the embassy should have told our people, get out. At least we know the Americans and the British have the latest intelligence that we don't have. You don't, when an ambassador said I called a Nigerian student and he told me that the Russians were only firing bullets at buildings and not at people. I said, oh, come off it. Even sitting in my own room here and watching CNN, I could see human beings, being injured and so on. So this is one area where let's just throw up our hands and do the usual Nigerian thing. Leave it to God to save them.
Yeah.
Well, we have a church in Kyiv, by the way, sir.
Well, we
Pastored by Pastor Sunday Adelaja.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. We have a church there.
I know him.
We were asleep at the wheel, it appears, and not for the first time. But to go back to what you were saying earlier, the parallels with Hitler, Hitler had his Mein Kampf, really laying bare who he was, what he intended to do. Putin had that 5,000-word article. If you can't be bothered to read it, he actually said to George Bush in 2008, Ukraine is not even a country. So all of this was clear. We have modern-day Neville Chamberlains with their policy of appeasement. But now that we're in Cold War 2.0, are we at risk of World War III? Because we also have Lebensraum, don't we? This invasion is similar to that. The only difference here is that Putin has not attacked NATO. NATO will not trigger that Article 5. What would constitute an attack on NATO, though, I'm wondering? Because the frontiers have shifted. If he has any kind of a massive cyber attack affecting NATO, will that make NATO finally impose these sanctions that we're all talking about that are the obvious solution here? What will it cost NATO to finally act decisively?
A very good question, especially given the elasticity of the definition that NATO countries come up with while they engage in contortion of all different kinds. Will it be one bullet, one Russian bullet, by accident hitting a NATO soldier in Latvia or Estonia or Poland? Will that constitute it? Will it be one Russian soldier maybe running away from something who accidentally, since those borders are not marked anyway, crossing over? We don't know it. Will it be a Russian plane while being engaged in dogfight, straying over? They will stretch and stretch and stretch until we wouldn't even know what then constitutes intrusion that will trigger Article 5. Let me stick out my neck. Incidentally, last time I appeared on this program, I think it's about 2 weeks ago, Tundu, you made me stretch out my neck and I almost got it cut off. When you told me the Russians had announced they were pulling back their troops, and I went to bed with my 2 eyes closed. I opened my eyes, and lo and behold, those troops had come back. Don't, now I'm pushing out my neck again in answer to your question. I don't think that Putin is going to be mad enough to cross the border into Poland or Latvia or Ethiopia or Bulgaria to cross that NATO line. I don't think so, because even Biden would then have to fight. Because once you cross one boundary, then where are you going to stop? When you get to Paris? Or when you get to Berlin? Or what? You know, the only country to me who has shown that he's got a backbone, apart from other things you may have, has been Germany.
Yes.
From day one, as soon as Putin recognized those things, the German chancellor grounded that gas pipeline. He gave his all, the maximum that Germany could do. He did it, while others were talking about sanctions on 2 Russians and 3 Russian companies. Germany gave his all. And yet it was Germany that they had thought, you know, will waver. He didn't waver. So I don't know really what is going to trigger off Article 5, because they've been so elastic in their definition of that. But we are in a dangerous time. We are in a dangerous time. I won't ask you a question, since you ask me questions. But have you thought of China invading Taiwan now that America is so concerned with war in Europe?
Yes, sir.
Yes.
Because, you know, you've got a very smart set of people in Peking. They are monitoring this. I know Peking issued a very strong statement committing itself to territorial integrity of states. They said so. But then they don't regard Taiwan as a foreign country, the same way that Putin didn't regard Ukraine as a sovereign, as a foreign country. So we are in a period where the lights may be going out on the existing world order, and only God knows what it will look like when that light gets switched on again.
Okay, 2 things, sir. It is obvious that Putin doesn't regard anybody, even in Europe, even with Germany, because Olaf was there with him to talk to him. When I saw that press conference, Putin was taking the mickey off Olaf Scholz. He was denigrating him, seriously. He did the same to Macron too, of France and the likes. So he doesn't care about anybody. In looking for solutions, would it be whimsical for the Allies to start something I call the Charlie Wilson approach, which was used a lot in the Cold War? It was called the Charlie Wilson's War. Putin still has some things he will deal with. The Chechen crisis is not totally over. Would it be best for the Allies to prop the Chechen guys against Putin and start sort of like an uprising against him, which is, like you said, guerrilla warfare, to distract him? Because it worked well with Charlie Wilson during the Cold War, and that was how they kept him at bay amidst other things. Could that be an option now?
I'll agree with you totally, Mr. Oseni. I will even go further than that. there are other weak points there are other weak points that Russia has that could be activated. Another one, in addition to what you said, another one is this electronic warfare. Surely, America has the capacity to weaken the, if you like, the control centers in the Russian Ministry of Defense, their computers. They do have that capacity. Thirdly, I mean, if I were Biden, again, let me repeat, I don't intend to use them, but if I were Biden, by tomorrow, the American 82nd Intervention Division will be flown lock, stock, and barrel into Europe. I will move American warships also into the Black Sea. I mean, look, I will go on a war footing.
Yes.
That Putin will not know whether finally Biden had woken up. I don't say that he will use them, but for God's sake, when you are faced with Muhammad Ali, at least, you know, you to shuffle your foot and throw a few punches into the air. Just make sure it doesn't land on Muhammad Ali or you'll flatten you. So there are things America can do rather than these acts of weakness. Diplomacy and peace don't allow for weakness. Who was it who said, if you don't want war, prepare for war? When especially you are dealing with an irrational opponent like, as you say, Ivan the Terrible. I would never say so. That is my legacy. That's the man. And do you know how many millions of Russians Ivan the Terrible killed? But, you know, I've tried to bend over backwards to try to understand what motivates Putin. But the history of Russian leaders has not really been a good one in terms of treatment of their people. How many millions did Stalin kill? How many? And incidentally, these same Russians who are in Ukraine, that is not the Berlusconi of the war, how did they get to Ukraine? Stalin went for a policy of Russification after the Second World War. First of all, through a process of starvation, millions of Ukrainians died. And then Stalin transferred millions of Russians onto their land in the Ukraine. These same Russians who are claiming that this land belongs to them, Stalin transferred them from other parts of the Soviet Union to Ukraine. So really, I mean, they have no legs to stand on if it comes to that. Historically, they don't. So, but there are a lot of things that the West can do, but not this appeasement policy. Not this appeasement policy.
Well, Prof, on war, I mean, with due respect, we have Raymond Aron on war, we have von Clausewitz also on war and all of that. But there are costs on all sides. And that perhaps, in my view, may be what is responsible for the kind of, contradictory response that we're getting from the West. Only yesterday, Antony Blinken, U.S. Secretary of State, was saying, yes, while we want to inflict maximum pain on Russia, we want to minimize the damage to us. So in war, nobody wins. Everyone loses. And the Americans have said they are deploying 7,000 troops in the last 24 hours, to move close to that theater of war. Whether those troops will become boots on the ground or not is another question. But I would like to help you, help us define the meaning, the implications of this war beyond citizen issues that I brought up earlier for us in Nigeria and also the whole of Africa. Because for the average Nigerian, for the average African, it's like, oh, Ukraine, Europe, that's far away. But, you know, how do we make people understand that we are all in this together? And what are the issues at stake for us in Africa?
All right. I know. I'll just take 30 seconds to deal with the first point you made. There are costs in war, and there are costs in appeasement. It depends now on how you balance it now. My fear, and the fear of people who are, you know, peaceful people, is that when you appease a dictator who is interested in, as Tundo reminded us, Hitler's Lembestrum, spreading the borders of your country, is a slippery slope to total war. And the history of the Second World War, and instead the history of the First World War also, you know, shows that. Now, it's how our interest there. Number one, the interest of the whole world is at stake here. Our banking system is also plugged into the world banking system. As for our own oligarchs here, who also have money domiciled in Britain, the moment you start going after Russian money, who knows where that will end? Number three, Nigerians love traveling. Grandmothers going to see their daughters who's just giving birth in Britain. I mean, look, the Nigerian route is the most lucrative for all airlines because they pile into. If war breaks out in Europe and airspace starts being restricted, well then Nigerians going to Britain or America or wherever are going to be affected. Our economy, unfortunately, somebody's misfortune could be somebody else's fortune. This could be an opportunity to rev up our gas supply. If we had a forward-thinking government in Abuja, actually by now you would have hired maybe 50 ships on which you would load those gas and keep them here until Europe now needs the gas, and then you could send it on at, you know, and make a healthy profit. The same thing with our supply of crude. Price of crude went up yesterday beyond $100, whereas of the time I went to sleep, it has dropped back on just under 99.8. I don't know what it is this morning. Now, this is an opportunity for us to build up our foreign exchange reserves. Of course, this is again assuming that we have excess crude that, you know, we would like to export. So, and of course, export of non-crude agricultural products and so on will be affected. Our exports will be affected because when there is no peace in the world, to whom are you going to export your goods? So, to me, that's where our interests, you know, bifurcate. But there was a question you once asked me, Dr. Abati. It wasn't on this program. I don't know, maybe we were talking privately, that what is going to help Africa? What is going to help Africa remove from its back the oppressive presence of Europe? And I said, you know, maybe a situation will come where European attention, capability, and what have you will be diverted for its own existential situation. And then we will seize that opportunity to put our house in order, so that by the time they turn around to come back, they will find a different Africa. This was about 3 months ago. Maybe this is it. So maybe we should be encouraging what is going on in Europe for our own existential situation in Africa. It may sound selfish, but then, I mean, national interest is a question of selfishness, if you like.
Well, thank you very much, Professor Akinyemi, for joining us on the morning show today. Always a delight to have you on the program.